Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to your horoscope for the week of October 22nd, 2023. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah. Thank you for being here. It is a remarkable astrological week, without a doubt. Big moves happening in the sky now. Boys, it's a very special time. And it is special in many ways. We are in a period between eclipses. The veils between the worlds are especially thin. And on the one hand, that can mean that we're able to recognize what spiritual lessons are playing out for us that much more readily. But there's also something very transparent, a lack of restriction, a lack of being able to hold ourselves back can be part of this time. Now, that's not true at the early part of the week, but that's definitely true as we move closer and closer to Saturday's eclipse. Now, this is an eclipse in the sign of Taurus, and this will be the last eclipse in Taurus until we move into a brand new decade. Some calming down of Taurian energy might occur, but not really, because we still have Uranus in here in one way or another for another couple of years. I'll be here to talk about all that every step of the way, as you know. Now, having said that, it is this eclipse that is so powerful and dramatic as well. And that's because of the other key power players that are involved in the energy of this time. And so we do start the week with energies that feel a lot more benevolent, a lot more steady. They feel a lot more grounded, and a sense of fairness being there as well. And that is because we have, well, on the one hand, Venus trine Jupiter. That is a very compassionate energy in earth signs. It helps us to manifest from the heart that much more. But what we also have is planets continuing to move into the sign of Scorpio. 2 weeks ago, Mars, the ancient ruling planet of Scorpio, moved into its home sign and very quickly aligned with Saturn. Well, this week, on Sunday, it's Mercury. Then on Monday, it's the Sun. Both of these planets change signs and very quickly move on to connect in supreme harmony with Saturn. And that's the very strong energy with us in the first half of the week, because it is over the course of this time that we very likely are going to be feeling as if we are that much more empowered. There are practical things we can do, practical steps that we can take to advance ourselves and to move ourselves forward in some way. But it is the second part of the week. Boy, does all of that turn on its head. And that's the thing with eclipses. There's something honest about them, even if it's hard. This is a lunar eclipse. It can bring with it closure as well. But in this case, very dramatic closure. On the same day of the eclipse, we have a rare opposition between Mars and Jupiter. Mars, as I said, strong in its home sign. It is Jupiter across the sky that brings with it a sense of growth and expansion. Whatever Jupiter touches becomes bigger, becomes a more dominant energy. Mars, though, is about urgency and about adrenaline, but it's also about frustration. However, in the sign of Scorpio, and with all signs having a spectrum of manifestation and ways that we can access that energy, well, the higher end of Scorpio, of course, is deeply honest, transformative, and encourages us to live a conscious and authentic life. But it is the other energy, the other side of the spectrum, that has to do with manipulation, being overly strategic, being obsessive. These are things that we're going to have to be careful of now, because, of course, with that opposition, it is going to expand energies. And you add to this the eclipse, it's going to bring so much emotion into it. We will be all up in our feels, all up in our frustration, wanting to have hope. And there's always every reason for hope, as we spoke of last week. However, in a more immediate capacity, it can feel like our feelings are on a bit of a roller coaster now as we strive to make sense of this time. Now, the late, great Jonathan Kaner, I know that many an astrologer found their way to becoming an astrologer through his work. I am one of them as well. And I remember way back in the day, he came under a little bit of fire. It would happen sometimes. He was like one of the most renowned astrologers, certainly in England, but even around the world as well. But this is way back in the day. He was beginning to help us to understand the energy of Scorpio in new ways. And of course, Scorpio has always been considered the scorpion. Makes sense, right? Scorpions as animals can be very strategic, but they understand what's worth really not just going after, but that exact moment to make the sting so that they can have the outcomes that they desire. But it was Jonathan Caner that started to talk about phoenixes. He started talking about snakes. And this is where, there was a little bit of cultural discussion around this, but I thought his metaphors were rather apt. The phoenix, of course, is about rising from the ashes. It is about whatever needs to happen, whatever needs to go, okay, but I am going to emerge in one way or another, more vibrant, more strong than I was before, soaring higher than I ever did before. That is the gift of Scorpio energy. All of us have Scorpio somewhere in our chart, of course, but collectively right now, we can see that there's a lot of promise in the possibility of having a sense of rebirth that allows something more vibrant to soar forward. It was Jonathan Caner that also talked about the snake and how the snake will shed skin from time to time so that a stronger, more vibrant version of itself can come forward as a result. And I think that for this moment we find ourselves in, as we begin Scorpio season, it is a real gift to contemplate those of us who actually have the choice to be able to say, how is it that I'm going to use Scorpion energy? For one way or another, right? For some reason or another, not everybody gets that choice. Sometimes people are very caught up in survival. Sometimes there are very dire or extreme external circumstances so that you're not necessarily thinking about your consciousness necessarily in that moment. That is human. We can have compassion for that. And then there are people who aren't necessarily directing energies consciously because they are in so much pain that the love and wisdom required to direct energies consciously, well, it is very, very hidden, buried in some way underneath all that hurt, so that their desire, their journey comes forward as anger or even cruelty as well. That's another side of the spectrum of Scorpio energy. But for those of us who have the privilege of being able to self-actualize, to be able to consciously choose, we've been exposed to the information, we've had the motivation for different reasons, so that we can choose to move towards greater love and greater wisdom. I feel like in many ways now we're being called on to be agents of change in whatever way feels right for you, in whatever way feels safe for you. Now, of course, it's Scorpio. It's never going to feel completely safe. There's something about chaos in which the energy of Scorpio is especially calm. It's because life has changed. And where it is that things are not changing, they're stagnating. And that just doesn't work for the Scorpio vibe. And so we can see this embodied in our favorite Scorpios out there, right? Think about your life. Think about these people who in some way are able to constantly transform and rebirth themselves as they need to, sometimes in ways that aren't necessarily evident or obvious to everybody out there. And yet there's that constant quest towards becoming something more authentic, becoming something more real than they were before. And an understanding that in order to do that, we have to embrace and actually sit in the middle of the space in which change that blends into chaos is taking place. Now, interesting to think of, on the one hand, Scorpio energy, right? As we've been discussing. And then we've got this Taurus lunar eclipse. And Taurus is the bull. Bulls have long been considered a symbol of fertility and deeply spiritual animals. In fact, we see many spiritual traditions that honor the representation that the bull represents. It is Taurus that is also a fixed sign, but it is the opposite in many ways of wanting chaos. In fact, it wants something that feels measured and sure and practical, wants something that feels as if it's worth being diligent for. It prizes consistency and finds strength within it. But that is actually an embodied strength, a spiritual strength, if you will. It is about being truly present for your life instead of getting lost in your feelings. That's what we're looking at here when we look at this dichotomy playing out. The lower vibration of Scorpio to higher vibrations of Scorpio is all ultimately about how we're feeling, how we're channeling those feelings, how we're moving towards our spiritual lessons consciously. But with Taurus, it's about how present we can be that determines where we are on that spectrum. The more present we are, the higher we ascend. That decision to do this work is going to be hard with this eclipse. I want to be straightforward with you on that. With the eclipse taking place, having the opposition of Mars and Jupiter on top of the eclipse, there's all this emotion, there's all these feels, there's all this angst. There's this heightened sense of anger and frustration. But there's also the promise here of healing something profound. As the eclipse represents these dramatic turnarounds, these very strong sense of emotion and strength that could be playing out individually and on the world stage, there is a calm that takes place on the lead up to it. And that happens at the very beginning of the week. On the one hand, we get Venus trine Jupiter. This is so compassionate. The fact that both planets are in Earth signs now is about manifesting from a place of idealism that is going to bring a lot of hope to a lot of people. We've got Mercury and the Sun moving into the sign of Scorpio, both planets speaking in supreme harmony with Saturn. That's all about stability. It's about the long term and what we're actually creating and feeling as if we're doing something today that can create a more stable future. Wonderful energies. However, all energies change. All energies transform into something else. And it is in some ways quite the shift, quite the swing that's going to be happening now. So make sure you're being very kind and gentle to yourself and to others during this time. But at least in the early part of the week, there are some cooler heads, more practical steps that are being taken that help us to feel a little bit more grounded, which is actually something a lot of us could really use because it's groundedness that is also embodiedness. And it is only an embodiment that we can truly be in the present moment. To be present with ourselves is to recognize the sacredness of just being alive right now, being able to live, being able to breathe as a spiritual experience in and of itself, as an expression of what it is that we're here to do. In many ways, we are here to actually be present. I know that sometimes there can be feelings of uncertainty, feelings of guilt as well, for those that can't have the things that, and by things I mean the freedoms, the peace that so many of us take for granted, and yet not allowing ourselves to be present for that good fortune makes us less effective to change circumstances for other people so that they too might move towards greater peace, greater calm, greater presence. I think that sometimes presence is hard also because when we are embodied, when we are within ourselves, feeling everything, well, we just feel like we might be overcome. We feel that perhaps we'll get lost in our feelings in some way, having spent, in many cases, a lifetime pushing feelings down, telling ourselves they don't matter, making ourselves numb in some way. But there's no power in that. And it's these moments that jolt us awake that also help us to be responsible for actually taking advantage of this moment. The privilege of self-actualizing is ultimately found in being present for our lives. Being numb to external circumstances, including our own unhappiness, only gets us so far. There comes a moment for all of us where just to placate, to go along, just to go along, well, it just isn't working for us anymore. I think a lot of us are reaching that place now. And I think that this eclipse season in particular, it's been in some ways a wake up. First, it was not last week, but the week before, that we had that eclipse in the sign of Libra. That was all about our relations to each other, our balance with each other. The fact that the South Node is in the sign of Libra now, it brought with it an awareness around the strain of our alliances with others. It is this eclipse, though, in the sign of Taurus, that is inviting us to look at what it is that's hard so that we can actually change it in a real way. Not just tell ourselves things are different, fantasize about them, which has its place, absolutely. I talked about hope a little bit earlier. Very valuable and important. Visualizations, aligning with what it is you want to manifest energetically. These are spiritual tools that we can use, but we can only really use them effectively when we first go through the pain that represents the resistance that we might have in some way. And why is that there? Because it served a function at some point in our life, perhaps in our early life. But there comes a point when it's served its purpose, it's not working for us anymore. Once we recognize it, we're already on the pathway towards changing it and transforming it in a meaningful way. So you may notice I've been traveling around lately. This is when I'm most at peace, when I'm exploring the world. Recently, I was in Bolivia for 3 weeks. Now I'm in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. It's amazing. I'm very happy to be here. And if you watch me and you want to connect for a hug or a coffee or something, I'd be very, very happy. And I would very much love to make that time. I don't know how long I'm going to be here, maybe just a couple more days. See where the universe takes me. But I mention this because it's been rather fascinating to consider. There's been this memory that's been coming up in my mind again and again. Perhaps it's a story I'm telling myself, but it is something that has been bringing a lot of emotion to the surface for me. I think that the pandemic was all about getting us honest. That was the whole point. We had no choice but to be still for ourselves and for our lives. And in that space, we had to be honest about how we really felt about key things in our life. And so you saw a lot of people get married. I saw a lot of people have babies. And I also saw a lot of people like myself go through breakups. And the one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is how it wasn't until the pandemic that I became aware of how numb I had become. I found ways to sort of navigate that emotion. But in so many ways, my life had become so small. And to the outside, it didn't look that way. It looked fabulous and Cancun and all that kind of stuff, because if you've watched me for a while, you know I lived in Cancun for 7 years. It was wonderful. It was a powerfully spiritual place. But for me, that represented limiting myself, becoming numb in some way. And how once I made the change and said no to that, how hard that was, emotionally hard that was, but I felt that I don't want to spend my life being numb. I am going to live in this life. I am embodied for a reason, and it is to experience all of life. And I look at the sky and I think about what work do more of us need to do, myself included, to help us to understand what it is to embrace life more fully. One of the gifts of the energy of Scorpio is to be able to acknowledge where things aren't perfect, that life can be messy and complicated and unfair even as well, but it's still worth living and feeling it all. And the energy of Taurus says to feel it all doesn't always mean being present, but it's only in the present that we really find ourselves, our true selves, and who it is that we really are. How many of us might now find a moment of getting very caught up in emotion, but also being triggered? That's Mars opposite Jupiter. We may find ourselves getting triggered and old stuff coming forward, responses rooted in old stuff coming forward. But ultimately, that is an invitation that invites us to look at where perhaps we've been suppressing, we've made ourselves numb to certain things that we really feel. It is only when we allow them to come forward, it is only when we acknowledge not only what we're feeling, but the root of what has brought us to this moment, that we then can actually do the work and that we then can live truly present, because then the present is where the peace is, and the present is where the power is. What I love about this week for us, there's so much here. It is a powerful and meaningful astrological moment. Well, I love the honesty of this time for each of us in our own individual journeys. And it's about getting honest about it all, our motivations, our guilt, our desire for something more authentic, for something more real, and most importantly, our desire for peace. The recognition of where we have power, but also the limits of our power, I think is a big Scorpio lesson that we are engaged in now, especially as individuals who are looking at and a part of the collective and what's happening on the world stage. But it is this time that ultimately has us facing our power, but our powerlessness as well. It is ultimately by facing and acknowledging those emotions, those feelings, as complex and messy as they might be, where we feel that things have not been fair, especially to us, but also where it is that maybe we have sorrow and regret for where we could have been better to others. It is now that we're able to see it more clearly, and it may come up very quickly. There's a trigger that may very well take place for us. Not fun, and yet valuable if we choose to use it, to move towards being present and to move towards becoming more compassionate. Now, compassion, some would say, and some Buddhists would say, compassion is only found in the present moment, because it's there that you're able to share the experience of life that much more. You're able to see yourself in the collective, and as part of the collective, you're able to lose yourself in the collective. It is only by being present with breath that you can actually make that happen. Well, that's certainly one way to go about it. Doing the hard work of healing, but also allowing ourselves to focus our mind just on breath. And then going back to whatever it is that we were feeling can be a very powerful way of helping us to understand the complexities and layers within us as well. And it is in doing that that we are able to then sit in a place of empowerment, to really touch on where it is that we do have power by accepting where we don't have power, is where we become most effective to become truly meaningful agents of change now. Well, thank you so much for watching. What do you love about this week? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading you guys, and to prove it to you, here are some of my most recent favorite comments. Thank you to everybody who likes, who comments, who subscribes, who shares, who thumbs up. All of it means so much and supports the channel. I'm truly so grateful for you. Thank you. And of course, if you want to know how all this wonderful stuff this week speaks to you in your sign, log on to NadiyaShahSuperstars.com, where you get expanded, exclusive video scopes each and every week for as low as just $3 a month with choose your tuition rate. Now, higher tiers get you things like all access passes to Synchronicity University events, consultations with me, and so much more. All of this in the superstar space at NadiyaShahSuperstars.com. Links are in the description below. Synchronicity University has some incredible programs taking place very, very soon. As we begin this week, you've got about 8 days left to choose your tuition rate, as low as just $5 a class to learn from these superstar, incredible astrologers on offer only at Synchronicity University with its choose your tuition rate. And I'm going to start with my friend Yuridia Robles. Now, Yuridia is a star of Mayan astrology. We co-wrote a book together using her wisdom and putting it into my words. Now she's bringing a class that builds on that book. So you do get to look at the Mayan signs, but then you also look at the planets and so much more stuff that she hasn't shared in English before. And so I hope that you'll join us. Yuridia really is someone that I consider a brilliant astrologer. She's helped me on my journey, certainly. And to learn from her at this rate is a very special opportunity. I think of Mayan astrology as also representing indigenous wisdom of the Americas in its own way, in its own specific context, certainly, but also for us to be able to see with greater universality how astrology has been understood, different time frames, different civilizations. Well, it enriches our practice that much more, as Yuridia will show you. So again, you've got just a touch over a week left to choose your tuition rate, as low as just $5 a class, to learn from Yuridia at synchronicityuniversity.com. Learn more, sign up now. Links are in the description below. Synchronicity University presents the incredible Maria BLAQUIER, who's going to be teaching Draconic astrology, as I call it, the dragon's astrology. This way of understanding the sky will change your practice and can change your life. We were talking earlier about karma, and karma is a fascinating thing to consider. I think of it as the stuff that just shows up. And it shows up because on a soul level, it has some sense of things that our soul is ready to learn as part of her journey towards greater love and greater wisdom. Well, it is Maria who, as part of the interview I did with her, showed us what the Libra eclipse represented from the perspective of the dragon, from the perspective of the nodes. But after the camera was off, she read my chart and it was mind-blowing. I'll tell you, I was just so impressed. It made so much sense to consider not just the normal natal chart, but how do we understand the sky from the perspective of what the soul is here to do in this lifetime, what the soul promised itself it would do at this lifetime, which is what the nodes represent. So if you really want to dive into understanding the nodes as the dragon's head with the north node and the dragon's tail with the south node, if you really want to tap into the wisdom of what that actually means, why that has meant so much to astrologers for so long, why it has become this deeply spiritual symbol, an evolutionary symbol, well, it is Maria's class that you do want to take. You've got about 8 days left to choose your tuition rate. As low as just $5 a class, an unheard of rate to learn from the one and only Maria BLAQUIER. She is a superstar in many places around the world, and now she is growing and coming to Synchronicity University. Links are in the description below. Synchronicity University is so excited to welcome back our superstar astrologer, the one and only MARC LAURENSON, principal of the Sydney School of astrology. Now, Mark is famous in Australia, widely respected. He's been growing more and more, speaking more around the world. And of course, like I said, he's one of our most popular teachers. I think this is like the third or fourth program that he's actually bringing. And at Synchronicity University, it is the only place where you get to learn from Mark at that very low $5 a class level. Nowhere else does he teach at that level. And this time, Mark is going to come to Synchronicity University with a class on the soul's mission through forecasting. This is huge. Previously, he did a class on the soul's mission in the birth chart. He did a class on the nodes as well. Now, he's going to bring with him predictive tools so that you can look at how the soul's mission is unfolding in the chart by looking at the different ways in which astrologers use predictive techniques. Everything from progressions and transits and so much more he's going to be teaching you there. It is a jam-packed, very rich class, but it helps you to identify what the soul could be learning at a given moment, how whatever is taking place is part of that mission unfolding for you. It'll help you to see whatever you're going through in your chart with greater compassion, greater love, and greater wisdom as well. You've got 8 days left to choose your tuition rate, as low as just $5 a class, to learn from the one and only superstar astrologer, Mark LAURENSON. This is a class not to miss if you want to transform your practice so that you look at transits not as, oh my God, this is going to happen, which I can sometimes do. I'll be honest. I do that sometimes for myself. But I know once I talk to Mark, okay, it's like I see things properly. And seeing things properly means, how is this a part of a higher, more loving vision for my life? That's what he's going to help you to see. That is true empowerment through astrology. And so you can learn more and sign up now. Links are in the description below. Synchronicity University is so excited because this term we have 4 programs taking place, jam-packed, November here, and it includes, of course, a speaker series. And it is about 8 days left to choose your tuition rate to learn from these incredible astrologers, some renowned, some up and coming, and some that you've seen before, some brand new, all of them very, very special. So I'm going to start with the one and only Mark McGowan. Now, Mark is a television star. He's appeared more than once on VH1's show, Black Ink. He has this history as a medium that he brings to his astrological practice, and he's going to help you to recognize whatever it is that the wounds are in the chart and how to transform them from the inside out. Now, Mark is actually somebody who's really wise. And I had a conversation with him. He gave me so much hope, and he really helped me to identify, like, okay, if you're looking at where the wounding is, where do you find it? Is it Chiron? Is it Mars? Do we look here? Do we look there? Well, he's going to actually show you all those techniques so that as you bring the shadow within to light, you're able to become that much more a conscious version of yourself, a better, more loving, more wise version of yourself. We have some people coming back like Aquila Moon. Aquila Moon, I love her. She loves Venus. She always brings the Venus perspective. Well, she's going to be teaching a class on Venus and Black Moon Lilith together. What does that mean? How does that show up in your chart? She's going to be teaching some very practical skills that you can use right now. Another person coming back is the one and only Cosmic Homegirl, April. I love April. She's one of my favorite astrologers out there. And April is going to help us to understand the ascendant differently with greater richness, especially through the appearance. She gave us a little bit of a taste of that in the interview I did with her, so you might want to check that out. It is also going to be 2 new people that we have here. One is Preeti Insight. Now, Preeti did a tarot reading for me. It was amazing. Her insights and the way in which she brings an intuitive approach really spoke to me very strongly. And she's going to be teaching that very beginning intuitive approach to reading the tarot cards that I found very powerful. So this is also a class not to miss. And Angeles Lopez is going to be teaching for the first time at Synchronicity University a technique called time Lord periods. So this is about recognizing larger phases of life that span several years, what planet rules it, how you can use it to your advantage. It's a very specific ancient technique that she is going to bring. So you can see here, we've got lots of astro goodness, lots of wisdom, lots of knowledge at Synchronicity University now. And you've got just a few days left to choose your tuition rate. So it's just $5 a class to learn from this incredible cast as part of our November 2023 speaker series. Links are in the description below. And thank you. Thank you so much for this moment with you. Thank you for your trust. I'm so grateful for it. So like I said, I'm roaming around right now. I'm in Argentina. I know I want to go to Uruguay at some point. It's just across the river, so I'll figure out how to make that happen at some point. But the only thing I really know for sure is in a month's time, I have to be in Puerto Rico. And I have to be in Puerto Rico for the first time ever because Daddy Yankee is doing his last shows of his career, his last concerts, he says. That's it. And I am going to be going there. So if you are anywhere that I end up in, I would love to have a moment, a hug, a gratitude with you. If it is that you would like that, and if you're up for it, just send a message using the contact form on my website. Super easy to do, and we'll find a way to make that come together. The other thing that I did want to mention is my microphone got a little busted. And so I'm doing the best I can in post-production with sound quality. I hope it's okay. I hope you didn't hear too much of some popping and things that was happening in the background. And thank you for your patience with that as well. And just my hope is that there's more and more connection, more and more joy for all of us as we move through some times that can feel like an emotional roller coaster for all of us out there. There's a lot of uncertainty and insecurity as well. It is only in the present moment that we can find stability, especially at a time like this. So I hope that more of us choose to embrace this spiritual lesson of our time well. Thank you again. It'll be a great week. Enjoy.